The 6 inches rule. One of Dolores Umbridge's most notorious decrees concerned the physical proximity of students. She ordered that boys and girls must remain at least 6 inches apart at all times, later extending this distance to 8 inches. The decree was absurd in its level of micromanagement, policing normal social interaction as though it were a criminal act. This rule highlighted Umbridge's obsession with control and her lack of trust in students. Instead of addressing genuine safety concerns at Hogwarts, she chose to enforce arbitrary restrictions designed to limit personal freedom. The 6-inch rule was not only impractical to monitor in a crowded school, but also fostered a culture of suspicion, where natural friendships and interactions between students were treated as suspicious behavior. By mandating specific physical boundaries, Umbridge attempted to regulate teenage relationships in a way that had nothing to do with education. This decree was less about maintaining order and more about imposing authoritarian control over every aspect of students' daily lives. The Quibbler ban. Another of Umbridge's most extreme decrees was the outright ban of the Quibbler. This came immediately after Harry Potter gave an interview to the magazine detailing the truth of Voldemort's return, which the Ministry and Umbridge were determined to suppress. The decree stated that any student found in possession of the Quibbler would be expelled. The ban was not about protecting students, but about silencing information that challenged the Ministry's narrative. By criminalizing even the act of reading a magazine, Umbridge revealed her willingness to use censorship as a weapon of control. This marked one of the clearest examples of how her rule extended beyond education into propaganda and information warfare. The effect was immediate. While Umbridge intended to stamp out Harry's story, the ban had the opposite impact. Students, intrigued by the forbidden, sought out copies of the interview more eagerly. In practice, the decree demonstrated the futility of authoritarian censorship. Instead of diminishing Harry's voice, it amplified it across the school, undermining Umbridge's intended grip on Hogwarts. Teachers forbidden to speak. Under Educational Decree No. 26, Dolores Umbridge stripped Hogwarts professors of their ability to speak freely. The decree stated that teachers were only permitted to give information strictly related to the subjects they taught. Any comment, discussion, or advice outside of that narrow boundary was banned. This was a calculated move to prevent professors from warning students about Voldemort's return or supporting Dumbledore in any way. For centuries, Hogwarts professors had been not only instructors, but also mentors and guardians, offering students guidance in both magical and personal matters. Umbridge's law severed this relationship, reducing teachers to rigid, silenced figures. The decree also destroyed classroom trust. Teachers could not answer questions about what was happening in the wider wizarding world, and even casual conversations were restricted. By cutting off open dialogue, Umbridge ensured that students had fewer allies and were left isolated under her rule. It was a fundamental attack on the very purpose of education, turning Hogwarts into a place of indoctrination rather than learning. Disbanding student clubs. Educational Decree No. 24 ordered that all student clubs, organizations, teams, and societies be disbanded immediately. Any group of 3 or more students gathering would require prior approval from the High Inquisitor. This gave Umbridge direct authority to shut down any collective activity that might foster unity or resistance. The decree effectively targeted both harmless extracurricular groups and potentially threatening alliances. Quidditch teams, music clubs, and academic societies were suspended unless they passed Umbridge's scrutiny. On paper, she justified this as a means to maintain discipline. In practice, the true objective was to prevent the formation of Dumbledore's army and any similar efforts to oppose her. This rule isolated students from one another, cutting off important outlets for creativity, competition, and camaraderie. The impact was immediate. Hogwarts lost its sense of community, and students were discouraged from working together. The ban revealed Umbridge's broader strategy, destroying solidarity so she could exercise unchallenged control. The Headmistress Decree. When Albus Dumbledore was forced to flee Hogwarts after taking responsibility for Dumbledore's army, Dolores Umbridge used Educational Decree No. 28 to declare herself headmistress. Unlike her earlier role as High Inquisitor, this decree placed her in full command of the entire school. The decree symbolized the peak of Umbridge's authoritarian takeover. She gained formal control over Hogwarts' curriculum, staff, grounds, and disciplinary actions. However, her authority was shallow. The castle itself rejected her leadership. The protective enchantments and the school's very magic refused to cooperate with her in the way they had with previous headmasters. Doors sealed against her, passageways changed, and the headmaster's office remained inaccessible. This decree marked the moment Umbridge fully embodied the Ministry's oppressive presence at Hogwarts. Rather than strengthening her control, however, it exposed the illegitimacy of her power. The castle's resistance mirrored that of the students, showing that true authority at Hogwarts could not simply be taken by decree. Ban on Weasley products. Umbridge issued a decree specifically targeting goods created by Fred and George Weasley. Their joke products, which included skiving snack boxes, Peruvian instant darkness powder, and other inventive tricks, were banned from Hogwarts under the claim that they disrupted discipline. This decree was personal and petty. The Weasley twins had become symbols of rebellion within the school, using their inventions to mock Umbridge's authority. By outlawing their products, Umbridge aimed to crush student ingenuity and eliminate tools of resistance. Instead, the ban only made the Weasleys' items more appealing and cemented their status as heroes among their peers. The ban highlighted Umbridge's obsession with control at even the smallest levels of student life. While Voldemort threatened the wizarding world outside, Umbridge was focused on confiscating trick suites and portable swamps. Her misplaced priorities revealed not just her cruelty, but her pettiness, showing how far she was willing to go to enforce absolute obedience. Ban on music during study hours. Among the more trivial yet telling decrees, Umbridge forbade music from being played during study hours. On the surface, this seemed like a minor regulation, but it exposed her fixation on stamping out anything that might provide comfort or individuality within Hogwarts. Music had long been a part of life at the school, from the lively songs of the Gryffindor common room to the celebratory atmosphere of feasts. By removing it, Umbridge deliberately erased a source of joy and unity for students. The decree stripped away one of the few outlets of expression that could brighten the increasingly oppressive environment she was building. This ban, though not as dangerous as censorship or forced separations, demonstrated the invasive reach of Umbridge's rule. It showed her willingness to dictate even the smallest aspects of student life, where personal enjoyment and creative expression were deemed threats to discipline and control. Hands out of pockets rule. One of Umbridge's more absurd decrees required students to keep their hands outside of their pockets at all times while on school grounds. This rule had no educational purpose and offered no real benefit to order or safety. Instead, it exemplified her obsession with micromanaging every detail of student behavior. The decree treated normal, harmless actions as suspicious. It implied that students were always hiding something, whether contraband items, joke shop products, or even wands. In practice, it forced a culture of distrust, where innocent gestures were seen as potential rule-breaking. The rule also gave the Inquisitorial Squad and Filch yet another excuse to harass students. By targeting something as mundane as pocket placement, Umbridge demonstrated the extremes of her authoritarian mindset. Every movement was monitored, and even the most ordinary habits became punishable offenses. The decree turned Hogwarts into an environment of constant scrutiny, where students were stripped of privacy and dignity. Mail and owl censorship. Umbridge extended her control beyond the walls of the classrooms by placing restrictions on communication. All student correspondence sent by OWL was subject to inspection for contraband or subversive content. This meant every letter to family or friends could be read, intercepted, or confiscated by the authorities within the school. The censorship of OWL stripped students of one of their most important lifelines to the outside world. For many, letters were the only way to maintain contact with parents or guardians, particularly as news of Voldemort's return spread fear across the wizarding community. By interfering with this private communication, Umbridge effectively cut students off from support systems beyond Hogwarts. This decree revealed the depth of Umbridge's paranoia. She saw even innocent correspondence as a potential threat to her control. The inspection of mail turned Hogwarts into a closed system where every flow of information could be monitored, restricted, or silenced at her discretion. Ban on exploding bonbons and sweets. Umbridge issued decrees banning a range of magical sweets, including exploding bonbons, and any candy purchased from unauthorized suppliers. This extended her authority into the most trivial areas of student life, regulating what they could eat and where they could buy it. On the surface, the ban was justified as a safety measure. In reality, it was a transparent attempt to undermine student independence and stamp out the playful spirit that Hogwarts had always fostered. By criminalizing harmless treats, Umbridge turned normal acts of enjoyment into rule-breaking offenses. The ban also connected to her wider campaign against the Weasley twins, whose joke products were in direct competition with the ministry-approved order she tried to impose. Rather than focusing on real threats, Umbridge expended energy policing sweets, showing how her decrees often prioritized petty control over meaningful governance. Quidditch restrictions and broom confiscation. Umbridge also moved against one of Hogwarts' oldest traditions, Quidditch. Under her decrees, broomsticks could not be flown on school grounds except during authorized practices, and she later took the step of banning entire teams from competing. This included the suspension of Harry Potter, Fred Weasley, and George Weasley from Quidditch after a confrontation with Draco Malfoy. The impact of this rule was enormous. Quidditch was not simply a game, it was central to the school's culture, uniting students across houses and providing a source of pride and excitement. By attacking Quidditch, Umbridge deliberately targeted something beloved by the student body, further alienating herself from them. The confiscation of brooms added to the humiliation. Stripping students of their ability to fly cut them off from one of the most iconic aspects of wizarding life. The decree was not just disciplinary, it was vindictive, using Quidditch as a tool to punish and control rather than a sport to be celebrated. Ban on discussing last year's events. Umbridge also forbade students from talking about what had happened the previous year, including the Triwizard Tournament and the death of Cedric Diggory. Any mention of Voldemort's return was considered spreading lies and punishable under her authority. This decree was especially dangerous because it denied students access to the truth. At a time when Voldemort was regaining power, Umbridge enforced silence and fear, ensuring that Hogwarts students were kept ignorant of the real threats around them. It turned conversations about safety into acts of rebellion. By outlawing discussion of Cedric's death and the Dark Lord's return, Umbridge weaponized denial. She erased reality in favor of the Ministry's false narrative that everything was fine. This created a distorted environment where truth itself was treated as contraband, leaving students vulnerable and unprepared for what was happening beyond the castle walls. The Inquisitorial Squad. One of Umbridge's most notorious measures was the creation of the Inquisitorial Squad. This group consisted of select students, largely drawn from Slytherin House, who were granted authority to enforce Umbridge's decrees. Members were given the power to dock house points, patrol corridors, and report on their peers, effectively making them extensions of Umbridge's control. The squad turned classmates against each other, replacing trust with fear. Students no longer knew if the person sitting next to them might betray them for a handful of house points or for Umbridge's approval. By empowering students to police one another, Umbridge entrenched her authoritarian system and encouraged a culture of spying and intimidation. This move also highlighted her strategy of rewarding loyalty rather than merit. The Inquisitorial Squad was not chosen for responsibility or fairness, but for willingness to serve her regime. In doing so, Umbridge set up a miniature dictatorship within Hogwarts, ensuring that her power reached every corner of the school. Ban on half-breed literature. Umbridge also imposed a rule outlawing books and writings that discussed non-human beings such as centaurs, goblins, and other so-called half-breeds. This decree was rooted in her deep prejudice and reflected the Ministry's discriminatory attitudes under Cornelius Fudge's leadership. The ban was not simply about controlling reading material, it was a deliberate act of erasure designed to marginalize non-human magical beings by denying them representation in education. For centuries, Hogwarts had been a place where students could learn about magical creatures and cultures. Umbridge's decree cut off access to that knowledge, reinforcing her belief that only proper wizards mattered. This rule aligned closely with her behavior later in the story when she openly insulted and attacked centaurs. By censoring literature, she laid the groundwork for broader acts of bigotry, turning education into a tool for spreading exclusion and prejudice. The decree revealed how her authoritarianism was not only about control, but also about advancing her ideology of magical superiority. Ban on unauthorized textbooks. Umbridge extended her censorship by forbidding the use of any textbooks that had not been officially approved by the Ministry of Magic. This decree ensured that the only material students could access was material that aligned with her narrative. The most notable example was in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Instead of teaching practical spells or defensive magic, Umbridge assigned Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbert Slinkard, a book focused entirely on passive theory. This text instructed students to read about defense rather than practice it, leaving them completely unprepared for real threats. The decree was designed to weaken students' ability to resist Voldemort or any other danger. By limiting knowledge, Umbridge maintained control over what students could think and learn. This shift turned education into indoctrination, reducing Hogwarts from a school of magic into an institution of obedience. where information itself became tightly controlled by the Ministry's agenda. Mandatory reporting of suspicious behavior. Umbridge also required students to cooperate fully with investigations into so-called illicit activities. This decree meant that anyone who suspected another student of breaking rules or discussing forbidden topics was expected to report them. Failure to do so risked punishment, creating an atmosphere where silence or loyalty could be treated as complicity. The rule institutionalized mistrust among the student body. Friendships and house bonds were strained, as students no longer knew whether confiding in a peer might lead to betrayal. Combined with the Inquisitorial Squad, the decree made Hogwarts function like a surveillance state, where every word and action could be scrutinized. This measure completed the transformation of Hogwarts under Umbridge. It was no longer a school devoted to magical growth, but an environment of fear, censorship, and suspicion. By weaponizing students against each other, she ensured that her authority reached even into private conversations, leaving no space for resistance that was not immediately threatened with exposure. While Umbridge's decrees showed how far Hogwarts could fall under the Ministry's grip, they were only one chapter in the larger wizarding story. Beyond the films, the wizarding world continued to change in profound ways. To see how the timeline unfolded after Voldemort's defeat, watch our full breakdown of every major event that happened after the films finished.